What a limiter is a limiter essentially right here. What it does is it, in a matter of speaking, it will raise a little bit of compression and ultimately give you like a volume boost while creating like a threshold of a certain decibel level that your audio will never reach, or it'll never like surpass. So when I take this limiter, what I've been doing with all of these tracks essentially is when I've been doing this rough mix is essentially I've been making sure that none of these reach over negative 12 dB. Like, let me turn that bass down a little bit so that our final master audio sound has a fair amount of headroom right here. And so what I would do is you take you throw a limiter on the master, make the ceiling on the first one negative 3 dB, and then you boost the gain until you've excited and kind of expanded the sound to sound a little bit more dynamic and bright. And then I'll show you what I do when I throw the second limiter on. Well, let's do that first. The ceiling, so essentially what you're doing, the entire process is to prevent clipping, yes, but it's a little bit more dynamic than that. So what you're doing when you're leveling everything to about negative 12 dB is you're giving about negative 10 dB of headroom for your mastering engineer to play with, because you need to have a little bit of working room if you're sending a song to get mastered. I'm kind of doing it like the quick, engineer way if I wanted to just do it myself to make it a little bit more exciting. But yes, it's all the limiting threshold is to prevent it from ever clipping. Although if I push the gain too much, it will still clip. It'll never clip on the meter, but it'll start to distort. So you can still destroy the audio with a limiter, even though there is an output ceiling. But now that that's done, let me go ahead and show you what the second limiter does. So what you've done is you've maximized the resilience and the dynamic tone of like the harmonics and everything that are kind of stuck within the sound when it's at a low volume. And by putting your limiting threshold at negative 3 dB, instead of pushing it all the way up to like negative 30, or I'm sorry, negative 0.30, where it's kind of defaulted at when you open the limiter, what you're doing is within the spectrum of negative 3 decibels and 0.3 negative decibels, there's like a finite amount of extra dynamics that can only be brought out within a second limiting process, if that makes sense. Like if I were to just set this first limiter at negative 30 or negative 0.30 and just run it up to negative 0.30 and kind of just limit the audio at that, there's a certain level of dynamics that can't be captured with just one limiting process. So I'm going to throw the second one on here. We're going to throw it at negative 30, just default settings, and let's see what happens. Like there's an entire level of like instrumentation in that sample that I didn't even hear, even with the first limiter. Literally, like whatever's right here, the instrumentation in the background. Like there's a vocal sample in there. I didn't even notice any of that until that second limiter ran through.